Okay, so we're starting now with Chapter 8. Chapter 8 comes after the Congress of Vienna. Chapter 8 deals with Latin American revolutions. It deals with the 1848 revolutions in Europe, and that would incorporate liberalism, and it would incorporate conservatism and radicalism. And that's what we're basically going to cover in this chapter. But the first thing I want to talk about right now is Latin America, because Latin America changed quite a bit during the Napoleonic period, because you remember that Napoleon invaded Spain, and then he set up one of his brothers to be the king of Spain. Well, when he set up one of his brothers to become the king of Spain, the people in Latin America, they didn't really want to go by that king, so they started to have revolts and rebellions and set up their own government, so to speak. Now, if you look at the colonial map here, this is from 1815, you'll notice that Spain is in control of most of Latin America. This is Brazil, and they were controlled by Portugal. This was a Portuguese colony. There are a few other colonies here, a few French, a few British, but for the most part, it's the Spanish and then the Portuguese with the huge landmass. Now, so what they did, they started to have rebellions, and the rebellions were led mostly by a group of people that we call Creoles. Now, you'll remember the Enlightenment period fueled the American Revolution, it fueled the French Revolution, and it will also fuel the Latin American revolutions. These Creoles, what they did, they used the Enlightenment thinking to get rid of that monarch, that kind of brand new Napoleon monarch, and then when the Congress of Vienna changed everything back, they still wanted to keep their freedom. So one of the things that we want to look at is a pyramid here of, this is the social structure of Latin America, okay, in the colonial period. Now, we'll do a graphic organizer on this. This is really important to understand how Latin America developed, because remember, when Latin America first developed with the conquistadors and the explorers, the king of Spain granted huge tracts of land, and not a lot of Spanish people came over for this. Okay, so it was a very strange social structure that developed. So here's kind of how it developed, and this is really important for Latin America. At the top of the social structure pyramid, you have a group called Peninsulares. Now, Peninsulares were the Europeans born in Europe. Let's just talk Spain, because it's kind of Portugal too, but let's talk about Spain. So it was Spanish guys born in Spain, came to America and wanted to make money. They got huge tracts of land granted to them. They were conquistadors, and then later they were adelantados, but these were guys that had lots of land. They were born in Spain. They came to America, got a bunch of land, they used up the natural resources, and their idea was to make a bunch of money, spend about 20 years in Latin America, and then go back to Spain and retire nicely in the mountains. So the Peninsulares, they didn't really think of themselves as Americans. They were coming to make money and going back home. Also, legally, they were the ones that worked in the government, because, New Spain, it was still a Spanish colony, so they worked in the government. All right? So they were very powerful. Now, the next group on here is a group we call the Creoles. The Creoles were not born in Spain. They were born in New Spain. They were born in America. So the Creoles were, they weren't going back to Spain. They were living in America. They were going to be there. They were powerful. They had a lot of land. But they were the Spanish people in Latin America. Okay, so they came from Spanish mothers and fathers, but they were going to stay. And there was not a lot of them. Keep in mind, now this is very different from the United States of America, because in our country, a lot of English came over, and lots of people came over to settle. English, and then Germans and the Scotch Irish, and everybody came over. But a lot of people were moving to the United States so that they could live there, but not the Spanish. All right, so that was the Creoles, kind of a small group, lots of money, lots of power, lots of land, because they still had huge grants of land. The next group on here is the Mestizos. The Mestizos were people who had a Spanish father and a Native American mother. So this is a blending of cultures here. Okay, again, not a lot of Spanish women came over, so a lot of times Spanish men married the Native American Indian women. Okay, so this is the Mestizos. They didn't have as much power and land and money as the Creoles, and they were a very large group. The next group below them were the Native American Indians. So these were the people that were not of mixed blood. These were native peoples. They were a little bit lower on this scale, or on this pyramid. And the last were enslaved persons brought from Africa. Okay, so these did not have any rights in the colonial system, or very few rights in the colonial system. These terms, and we use these terms just to describe the social structure, so that's important to understand. Also, keep in mind that with this social structure, very different from ours, very different from the upper class, middle class, working class that we have today. Private property ownership was only really from the Creoles, the Creoles, Peninsulares, some of the Mestizos maybe, but the private property ownership was held in the hands of a very small amount of people, so it was very different from the way that we developed in the United States. Okay, that'll be the end of section 1, chapter 8.